Yo, what's up guys, welcome to my humble YouTube channel where I bring you fanfiction that will brighten your days. Before we start, a subscribe is greatly appreciated, and don't forget to leave a like and ring the bell icon so you won't miss exciting new fanfiction stories. Tensura. Melting the Eternal Frost by JackDaWeb. Chapter 4. World-shattering news. Rimuru's paw of the burst of aura lasted only for a brief moment, but the pressure it gave off was no joke. Velzard's demeanor made a complete turnaround after she concealed her aura and flashed a carefree smile like nothing happened. My subordinates were in a state of shock. Some almost got knocked unconscious and were trying to recover, while Veldora looked like he nearly shit himself. As if on pure instinct, everyone in the room except for those who had already met her earlier prostrated themselves on the ground before Velzard's powerful presence. Velzard-sama, my executives exclaimed in unison. Foo. Sorry about that, everyone. I only intended to give you all a light scare, but I guess that was too far. Anyway, since my introduction is done, I'll let Rimuru Dono explain the rest, Velzard said politely. Everyone slowly got up and eventually sat back down, still looking a bit shaken. I sighed audibly at her antics, which Velzard noticed, earning me a smirk from her before she sat down with a satisfied look. That was a little more than going too far, but I can't really do much about it. Once everyone had somewhat recovered and order was restored in the room, I continued with the meeting. So as I said earlier, we will be having a new member among the Tempest executives. And yes, Velzard-san here is that new member. She'll be my supervisor from now on. With that being said, I'd like you all to treat her with the same level of respect that you show towards me, though I believe you guys don't need me to tell you that, I said nonchalantly. I looked around at my subordinates to gauge their reactions, and it was more or less the same, a mix of shock and amazement followed by a nod of agreement. Kufufu, we gladly welcome you to our ranks, Velzard-sama. With your guidance, Rimuru-sama will grow exponentially faster and soon reach the pinnacle of power. Diablo proclaimed with a bow, and Velzard smiled in satisfaction. Indeed, we are truly honored to have you here in Tempest, Velzard-sama, Benimaru said respectfully, and the rest of my executives nodded. Question. Rimuru, where exactly will my sister be staying? Veldora suddenly chimed in with a question that got everyone's attention. We could construct a domain for Velzard-sama in the off-skirts of the city. It might take a while depending on the scale of the structure, but I can temporarily put other construction projects on pause to have more orcs focus on it, Geld suggested. Indeed, it would be a good idea to give Velzard her own place to stay, especially considering her status. But for now, I have something else in mind. It'd be nice to have the top 3 individuals of Tempest living in one house in the meantime. I'll eventually get those 2 their own place in the future, but this arrangement will suffice for now. Not a bad idea. But I was thinking that instead of creating a whole new structure, we could just expand my personal home and have her live there for the time being, I recommended. Veldora looked like he had just seen a ghost, and my subordinates were in deep thought. Velzard suddenly had the most devious grin on her face and giggled audibly enough for everyone's attention to be brought to her. Oh. She's probably gonna say something incredibly out of pocket. Era, aren't you skipping quite a few steps here, Rimuru-san? Already wanting me to live with you despite having only just met, how bold. Foo, though, I wouldn't mind, you know? She teased loudly, earning everyone's attention. This woman. I really didn't word that right. I felt my face heat up in embarrassment as my subordinates turned their heads to me with an amused look. Some lightly chuckled or giggled while others were trying to hold in their laughter. Veldora did not look amused at all, however, and he even looked somewhat mortified. That's not what I meant, sigh. I didn't word that properly, so let me explain it this time. Currently, the ones who live in my home are Veldora and myself. It's not a big place and just barely enough for 2 people since I'm quite a minimalist. Considering that the 2 top brasses of Tempest live in one house, and with your addition to our ranks, I was thinking it'd only make sense if you lived with us too. Plus, it's a good way for you to keep tabs on Veldora if you'd like, and it'd mean you could supervise me at more times. I explained profusely to clear up any misunderstanding. Foo, you're always fun to tease. I accept, and Veldora-kun, I do hope you behave yourself, dear little brother of mine, she said with a slight grin. Why yes. Velzard nay. Veldora replied quickly and nervously. Well, that's settled then, I said casually while clasping my hands together. Everyone nodded in approval, but then Shuna suddenly raised her hand. Rimuru-sama, should we announce our move to Tempest publicly? She asked. Her question got everyone thinking about it. Good question. There are pros and cons to doing so. I'm sure that other nations will get a hold of this news if we do announce it, causing it to spread like wildfire, though that might not be a bad thing. What do you guys think? I asked for their opinion. After a few seconds, Benimaru spoke up. That would serve as a really good deterrent for those looking to antagonize us. It would give us plenty of time to bolster our forces even more, he stated vehemently. I agree, Benimaru Dono. On top of that, the Western Holy Church is already incredibly hostile towards Veldora-sama, and I'm sure they're catching on about his revival. With Velzard-sama in Tempest, I'm sure that would halt any of their attempts to mess with us, Kaijin remarked. Will you be alright with that, Velzard-san? Your move to Tempest will be announced publicly, and most likely, foreigners and spies currently visiting the country will catch wind of the news, causing it to spread. I asked her somewhat worriedly. Foo, I have no problem with it. It's about time I let those puny humans know of my presence. While I'm sure that everyone in the world already knows who I am, I don't have quite the reputation that Veldora has. She replied smugly. Everyone nodded in agreement, and Veldora just smiled awkwardly while scratching the back of his head. Yosh. We'll be announcing it later in the afternoon. Rigard, Shuna, Geld, the three of you will be tasked to gather the citizens for the announcement later. I instructed them briefly. Understood. Rimuru-sama, they said in unison. Third-person paw of the meeting had concluded, and everyone left the room to resume their duties. Rimuru and Veldora proceeded to give Velzard a tour around the city, showing her the various facilities and commodities Tempest had to offer. Of course, her aura was concealed to not raise any concern from the people. Velzard was astonished to witness the advancement of the nation, especially in such a short time frame. She then learned that it's only been roughly 2 years since the country was established. The most surprising revelation for her was that this whole city started as only a mere goblin village. On their tour around the city, they tried out many different dishes and desserts from various places, and Velzard absolutely loved each and every one of the cuisines offered. Rimuru and Velzard also got to know more about one another during their exploration of the city. Rimuru learned that Velzard rarely ever went out to explore human nations and delve into their culture and cuisines when she resided in the Frozen Palace. Most of the food she's ever experienced was brought home by Rain or Misery from their various adventures. While they weren't bad, it's nothing compared to what she got to experience in Tempest. They continued exploring around the city while conversing about trivial matters. Velzard constantly teased Rimuru whenever the opportunity came up, but she would also engage in a conversation with her little brother from time to time to catch up with one another. Veldora took notice of his sister's peculiar attitude towards his sworn brother and made a mental note of it while trying to plan his escape. The last place they visited was the famous hot springs of Tempest. However, it was almost time for the announcement to happen, so they weren't able to go. Unexpectedly, Velzard asked Rimuru to accompany her to the hot springs later after the announcement was over. This threw him the hell off guard, and all sorts of scenarios started playing in his head. He was now visibly flustered, and Velzard teased him even more, causing him to nearly explode. While she was busy teasing Rimuru, Veldora took the opportunity to escape from them to read his manga in peace and stay the hell away from his sister. It was now time for the announcement to begin. The citizens gathered in front of the stage in the city square while the executives stood at the rear of the stage awaiting their lord's entrance. Not long after, Rimuru and Velzard appeared. Rimuru walked up to the podium while the Velzard stood beside him. Her presence next to Rimuru caught the audience's attention, and quite a few people remembered her when she was touring around the city with their lord and guardian deity. Rimuru's pav. Once I stood at the podium, I gazed upon my citizens and then turned to my executives who were standing some distance behind me. The people were looking curiously at Velzard, who was standing right next to me, but everyone remained silent and eagerly waiting for my announcement. I took a deep breath before beginning my speech. I would like to thank everyone for showing up to this sudden announcement. First things first, as you may all know, I recently declared myself as a Demon Lord. After defeating Clayman, I am now officially recognized as a member of the Demon Lord Council, I announced proudly. The people erupted in applause and started giving their congratulations after hearing my statement. It was still quite the sight to witness, even though I've seen it many times. I looked around at my citizens with a grin of satisfaction. Everyone eventually settled down and I continued. Naturally, this meant that I would be officially getting my own territory, and it was decided that the entirety of the Great Jura Forest would be under my rule from here on out, I added. This revelation made everyone more livid than they already were from my last announcement, and naturally so. The Great Jura Forest is a gigantic area home to many different species and nations, along with an abundance of precious resources. Having complete control over such a vast territory meant that our nation would prosper to even greater heights. However, that isn't the main reason I called for this announcement. I gathered all of you here today to formally introduce you to a new member of the Tempest executives. She holds a very high position, I'd say arguably in equal standing to mine. I expect you all to show her the same level of respect that you show me. I ordered firmly. The citizens were shocked to learn that a new executive, especially one of such a high position, was joining. There were some in the crowd who immediately turned their attention to the woman standing next to me, seemingly already having an idea of who I was talking about. Turning to look over at Velzard, I gave her a nod, signaling for her to introduce herself. I took another deep breath and continued. Everyone, I'll now let the person in question introduce herself, I said, and promptly gave the stage to Velzard. She took a few steps away from the podium and now stood at the center of the stage. She looked around at the crowd as it was pin-drop silent, with all attention on her. Closing her eyes, she began releasing a fraction of her aura, which I recently learned is called Dragon Spirit Hockey. Because we were now in an open area, she released a bit more than she did at the meeting, but still held back a ton to not kill anyone or damage property unnecessarily. Despite holding back, the pressure was even greater than before as the air temperature suddenly dropped and all the citizens fell to their knees. My executives were barely able to stand still and resist getting blown back by the sheer force. After a few seconds, she opened her eyes and an air of pure divinity surrounded her. Greetings, dear citizens of Tempest. It's a pleasure to meet you all. My name is Velzard, the White Ice Dragon. From this day onward, I will be residing in this nation and be the personal supervisor of your master, Rimuru Tempest. She declared calmly but powerfully. Every word she spoke held power and authority behind it, displaying her full might as a true dragon. Velzard Sama. We are honored to be in your presence, the people exclaimed resoundingly. Satisfied with the citizens' reception, Velzard concealed her aura, subsequently releasing all the pressure in the air and returning the temperature to normal. Once again, I'm reminded of her true power and the respect it commands. I'm seriously lucky to have two of the true dragons on my side. Veldora is levels above me in strength despite my recent evolution into a true demon lord, and his sister is even more terrifying than him. I'm not so sure what Velzard, or hell, even Diablo, sees in me. They said something about me having untapped or immeasurable potential but never went into further detail. Assuming they're correct, then with the guidance of Raphael and Velzard, I'm confident I'll be able to unleash this so-called potential. I couldn't help but smile at the thought while also feeling a bit of pity for those who oppose us. Sigh, I'm really acting like an actual demon lord now. After everyone has recovered from their shock, I clear my throat before speaking. That more or less concludes all the announcements I wanted to make. Once again, I would like to thank you all for being here. Have a good rest of your day. Glory to Tempest. I proclaimed loudly and everyone stood in unison. Glory to Tempest and Rimuru Sama. The crowd responded thunderously and erupted into applause. Third-person paw of the announcement came to an end and everyone went along with their days. Velzard's debut in Tempest became the talk of the city and the citizens rejoiced at the thought of having a second and even more powerful true dragon residing in the nation. Unfortunately, the same could not be said for foreigners visiting the country. While the majority of them were simply exploring the city, some were sent by neighboring countries to gather information on the nation of monsters, and they got more than they bargained for. Velzard's reputation is not as infamous as her little brothers. Humanity saw the mighty storm dragon as the very embodiment of chaos and destruction, a force of nature not to be messed with. His power molded the great Jura forest and his very name struck fear into the hearts of mortals. However, Velzard is still widely known as the oldest and strongest of the true dragons currently alive. Society as a whole already feared the might of the true dragons. And Veldora's constant rampaging in the past which wiped out entire civilizations off the map only fueled this dread. It was already too much for humans to handle, so the fact that there exists an individual whom even the mighty storm dragon could not hope to match is information that strikes despair into the heart and mind of any human. The White Ice Dragon, as she is called, was known for not being all that active in the world and rarely ever left the ice continent. Despite her inactivity, tales and legends were passed down from generation to generation. They told of her unmatched power that shaped entire continents and shook the very stars. As far as most of humanity is concerned, she is the strongest being in existence right after the creator himself, the Star King Dragon, Veldanava. The spies and foreigners hastily made their way back to their homelands in order to deliver the world-shattering news. Rimuru's ascension into the Demon Lord Council, the Storm Dragon's revival, and now the announcement of Velzard's allegiance to Tempest. All of these events happened one after another. Slowly but surely, the long balance of power that stood in the world was about to be flipped on its head. Early evening had arrived and the bustling nightlife of Tempest sprung forth. Beautiful and bright city lights adorned the streets and many stalls of different kinds had opened. Walking towards the famous hot springs was the king of the nation himself, Rimuru Tempest, and his newly appointed supervisor, the White Ice Dragon, Velzard. As promised, he accompanied her to experience one of the most visited places in Tempest for relaxation. Velzard's POV. I must say, the nightlife here is even more beautiful than I was expecting. The vibe of the whole place as Rimuru and I walked through the city was incredibly lively. From what Misery and Rain had told me before, people are usually off to sleep or work during the evening, and not much happens at this hour. Rimuru and I continued our walk while discussing some trivial matters and getting to know one another some more. His whole personality is extremely fascinating to me. Normally when picturing a demon lord, you'd imagine a tyrannical maniac who only lives to fight and rule with an iron fist. However, Rimuru is the exact opposite of that. While he does exhibit certain traits of a typical demon lord, such as possessing immense power, his overall demeanor is incredibly friendly and welcoming. After a few minutes of walking, we eventually reached the entrance of the hot springs and entered the lobby. A few people were going in and out of various baths with goblinas serving as the assistants for this establishment. I turned to look at Rimuru who seemed very apprehensive and shy. Fufufu, how cute. Are you sure you want to bathe in the hot spring with me? Rimuru asked meekly. Fufufu, of course, Rimuru-kun. As your supervisor, this is a requirement and cannot be compromised. I stated matter-of-factly. I've also started calling him Rimuru-kun now since I find it cuter. Sigh, well if you keep on insisting then I guess I've got no choice. But, I'll be going in my slime form. He said decisively while crossing his arms. Seeing this as an opportunity to tease him for the millionth time today, I grinned. Era, Rimuru-kun. Is there a problem with you bathing in your human form? Or are you perhaps trying to avoid certain things from happening? I asked teasingly and his face immediately turned red. Steam was practically coming out of his ears now too. That's not it, Velzard. He retorted loudly. Fufufu. Then what is it, Rimuru-kun? I pressed him further while getting my face closer to his. He appeared as if his soul just left his body, another easy victory. Sigh, your teasing will actually be the end of me, Velzard-san. Honestly, if you keep it up I might end up falling for you or something. A beautiful woman such as yourself constantly teasing me is not good for my non-existent heart. He said while clutching his chest trying to appear distressed. Is that a challenge? I questioned playfully. Whatever, Velzard-san. Let's go in now, he said dismissively in an attempt to brush aside my question. Satisfied with my victory, I let out a soft giggle. We then entered a mixed-gender bathing area and noticed that there was no one else around. I'm not a fan of high temperatures and the steam coming off from the water was certainly heating the area quite a bit. Despite that, I liked the atmosphere of the place since it really gave off a relaxing vibe and the little slime floaties were also a cute touch. Rimuru transformed into his slime form and hopped in the water. I followed shortly after him and removed my clothes immediately with magic before stepping into the water. I sat down and felt the sensation of the water on my skin. The feeling was quite nice, despite the temperature being a bit too high for my liking. This is my first time experiencing a hot spring bath and safe to say it felt very relaxing and even elating. I noticed Rimuru floating around on the water aimlessly, albeit somewhat far from where I was sitting. Fufufu, He's trying to avoid getting close to me, isn't he? Despite being technically genderless now, he's still identified as a male since he was once a human from another world who got reincarnated here as a slime. He told me this during our tour around Tempest and I was shocked upon learning it. Reincarnation into a different species entirely is something that has never been heard of, at least to my knowledge. Humans have died from other worlds and reincarnated in this world, but they remained as humans. But a human reincarnating as a monster has never happened until Rimuru. This alone made me sure that he has always been a very unique individual. Traveling through the space between worlds with nothing but your soul would normally destroy it. Meaning Rimuru's soul must be incredibly strong in order to survive such a journey. Even though he's a guy at heart, that fact doesn't bother me and I don't mind sharing a bath with him at all. He's adorable and incredibly fun to tease, so it's an easy win in my book. The time I spent with him earlier also made me see why his people have such high respect for him. It's not often you see kind and benevolent rulers like Rimuru in this world since they're usually greedy and only care about their own well-being. I stood up elegantly and the water started dripping off from my bare skin. I walked towards the floating Rimuru who hadn't noticed me yet and carefully picked him up from the water. His slime body was now pressed gently against my breasts and he turned around to face me with his adorable eyes. Well, I'm not exactly sure if they're eyes, but I digress. Foo, aren't you just adorable, Rimuru-kun? I said teasingly while patting him. Vive Velzard.